Hi, Sam here. Joined tonight by Mark and Zeke, discussing the cost of discipleship. And yeah, just one kind of side note, if you're watching this and you're interested at all in our channel, you like what we're doing, hit subscribe. I hate saying that, but I guess if like I get to 50 subscribers, something magic happens. I don't know. Hit it and we'll see. Besides that, yeah, we're talking about Bonhoeffer tonight, and we'll just get right into it. So um, let's see. Cheap grace, what's that about? That's quite a phrase, right? I know it struck me, and it was one of the things I remembered about reading the book before. And it's sort of like, I don't know, it kind of, I do sort of sense that Bonhoeffer was maybe, there's definitely some piss and vinegar in the book a little bit. And I think he was kind of scandalizing maybe the people, the Lutherans who would read it a little bit with that phrase. But I guess for the two of you, what do you think he meant by it, or what do you think he was trying to communicate?
I'll go first on that one because I want to hear what he's got to say about it.
And this is about the cheap grace part, or?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, I don't know, cheap grace, I feel like I've heard this term before. It feels like, once again, he feels very proto-evangelical, because I feel like terms like that, like cheap grace, is something you would see like in like a Christian bookstore today. I don't know. I don't have any problems with the idea per se. Like I didn't really see at least me personally, I didn't think he was trying to be overly negative or overly critical of other people. I just think he saw something that he thought was maybe incorrect or erroneous. Whereas like a lot of people, especially, it feels very pertinent to today where, a lot of people, it's very laissez-faire Christianity, and like you can kind of do whatever. Like you heard the term hyper grace maybe. So I feel like that's another kind of, you haven't heard that term before, Mark, or you have? Really? Wow, but neither of y'all. Okay, so hyper grace, I don't want to look it up, but like essentially the idea that you can do whatever you want, and then you can just ask God for forgiveness, and that's
Christian
okay.
hedonism.
Yes, there you go, exactly. And so I feel like that and cheap grace are kind of the same concept, maybe taken in different ways, but kind of the same idea that there's no cost for being a Christian, that you can just kind of willy-nilly, you don't have to have any sort of like faith. Yeah, you can do faith without any works, right? And I feel like that's a central core tenet of the faith. And I feel like that's what he was trying to get at with the concept of cheap grace versus like not so cheap grace.
I mean, it seems to always be a Catholic complaint, right? Basically all of this, like, okay, so you do what exactly? Nothing? Great. Even though we have basically at heart the same idea that baptism and grace are freely given. It's just a question of, do you have to do anything after that? So reading it through that lens was kind of interesting to me, because I kept coming back to this thought of, okay, you keep saying free grace, cheap grace, but why? Like, what are you doing on your end that they should be doing? Where I know whenever I do something wrong, I go to confession. I got to talk to a guy. And that's very uncomfortable, being honest. It's actually more uncomfortable with the screen for me instead of face-to-face, weirdly enough. But for me, that was something that was very difficult to try to parse out, where he wasn't complaining, it seemed, about that, yeah, your grace is free, but now what do you do with it? Which is fair enough. I do agree with that. For me, where I'm from, I'm struggling to come to terms with, okay, but why? Right? Every single time, but why?
Well, I think it kind of gets into maybe the second part of the reading, but I mean, obedience and faith, or obedience and grace, I think he ties very much together. And I actually feel like Bonhoeffer is actually very much a kind of into the Benedict option idea. and that he probably thought in general that Protestants could use more ritual and more discipline and more, I guess you could say, liturgy in some ways. I mean, like, I think he uses the term bourgeois at one point to kind of say it, kind of complain about the idea of cheap grace. And I guess the term cheap specifically, why do you think he uses cheap? I got my own ideas instead of like maybe false or because I think false or maybe fraudulent would be almost the same exact thing, right? But
I know to me, cheap kind of conjures up, if you're going to go the bourgeoisie sort of route, like disposable, not worth thinking about, taken for granted.
Yeah.
Right? I can get it at any time. I'm good. Like you're talking about this Christian hedonism thing. I can do whatever I want, and there's no sin of presumption, right? Like I can just go and get it done. I can, no problem. My sins are covered by the blood of the Lamb, buddy. Now, give me that hooker, sort of, right? Like that's not the way to discipleship. Bonhoeffer is on you. He's on you.
Yeah.
But you get what I mean, right?
Well, no, I mean, you are joking, but I think it's a real point that the idea that you can in some way either purchase grace or that someone else can have some ways mediate grace for you. I mean, it's not an entirely false idea, actually, which is kind of what makes it a little bit deceptive. I mean, the idea of Christ as the mediator or as Moses as a mediator, I mean, those are scriptural ideas, but at the same time, there definitely are points where it's funny. I mean, I thought of, like, for example, of all people, John Mellencamp, actually. And I heard this interview with him once, and the person had asked him about his faith, and he said, "Oh, well, I think my grandma, she has me covered. Like, she prayed enough. Like, I think she did what she needed to make me good with God," which, I mean, if you have members of your family who pray for you, which I know I've been blessed to have some, I mean, there is a grace in that, but at the same time, I mean, that doesn't mean you just go do whatever you want or that your actions are not part of it too. Yeah.
Also, I think his main example was the young rich ruler. So I think that kind of contrast of him having wealth and the idea of it being like cheap grace, I think kind of helps play in that connotation. And because the idea is that, and he expands on it further, that yes, the young rich ruler, in that instance and scenario, he would have, as far as we would have known, would have had to give up his possessions to follow Christ. But we ourselves don't have to do that per se. We just have to, it's a different kind of mindset. It's more about the mindset that you would be willing to give up everything. I think another great example would be like Abraham and Isaac, right? Like he'd be willing to give up. He'd waited how many years, like almost 100 years to have his son. And then God's like, hey, I'm taking your son away. And he was going to do it without hesitation, right? That's the kind of mindset I think he's trying to come around to. And that it's not always a money cost, but it's also like more of, I guess, an emotional cost, a spiritual cost that comes with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, money is definitely very forefront in Bonhoeffer's mind, though, I think, in these passages. That's one of the things that I was thinking about. And I don't know, I think of, like, for example, be thou my vision. And there's like a kind of like a New King James version of the song, You Are My Vision. And one of the lines in is, I don't care about man's possessions or man's empty praise. And I think of that, it's like, man, do I believe that though? I mean, it's like that's a tough thing to say. I don't care about money or what people think about me. I mean, or at least maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I care more about what God thinks about me than what other people think about me. Is that, I don't know, how true is that? I'd like to think it's true, but I mean, I don't know.
No, you're totally right there. I can't remember what I was listening to recently. Maybe it even might have been in the St. John Henry Newman meditations that I've been going through for Lent, that we always condemn Judas for selling Christ for 20 pieces of silver, but my Lord, how much do I sell less? Right? I take a
Ooh,
lot
yeah.
less. I take a lot less all the time, and I betray you all the same. With the one thing that I do constantly come back to with the young rich man is
Mhm.
this idea that it's so much more intense in person with Christ than it is for us, and that most of the gospel stories are that way because they're encountering him face to face, and we're doing it essentially at a shadow's distance, where we're not always asked to give up everything at once, but even the little that we are asked to give up is so difficult, right? And we're not even willing to pay that cheap grace cost versus the expensive one that may be asked of us. Which gets us back to our previous conversation about the martyrs, right? We often think, can we do it? I don't know. I know I have difficulties. I mean, yesterday up here in Canada, we're supposed to have a huge ice storm. And I wonder how many people tried, like I did, to go Saturday to Mass instead of coming Sunday, because I intentionally rearranged my weekend to make sure I could avoid it. But how many people just gave up and said, "Yeah, if it happens, it happens." When it's supposed to be that we're encountering the grace of the Lord in the Holy Eucharist. We're there at Calvary every Mass, at least if you follow through on what it's supposed to be. And we couldn't even get up off our bums on Saturday to try it instead. Like, come on, like, just a little bit. That cheap grace is everywhere. We're all in it.
Yeah.
No matter whether you're going like me to confession or you don't believe you need to do that, you're still not off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can't be bothered to go to church for an hour on Sunday.
It's not even a Latin Mass, boys. Come on, it can't be that long.
Yeah. No, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess I sometimes definitely fall prey to those kinds of temptations, but yeah. Yeah. So I guess the other thing I thought about with cheap grace is, so you talk about cheap, but I mean, I guess the grace part of it, how would you define grace? Because I think there's a few different ways you could do that.
Gratuitous gift given freely.
I'll go with Mark's definition. This is not my territory. I don't know. It seems right. Any definition I have in my head uses the word grace in definition, which is therefore not a definition. So it's really tough. But I feel like it's something like,
what is a woman?
I know. I went to law school. I plead guilty. I sometimes grill people.
It's tough. It's something I feel like it's also best experienced, like when you're given to you, because obviously humans can give grace, right? You know, whether it's a grace period on a car loan or if it's something that you've done. But I think in the terms of, if we're talking about like in spiritual and Christianity, it's a lot more analogous to like grace given by a parent to a child, right? Like, because you understand that the child doesn't have the same understanding of the world that you do, and you can only apply that to God. How much greater his understanding, of course, and infinite, right, compared to ours of how everything works. And so when you look at it, I guess from that kind of lens, if like obviously Mark is a parent, he can understand if his kids do something, he realizes that they don't know any better if they are throwing a tantrum or whatever because they are a child. And even if it might be annoying in that time period, he has to give grace to them because he was once a child himself and he understands like, you know, what happened, right? So that's my best I think analogy I can give for grace.
No, it's really good. I mean, my son definitely needs grace more than I'm usually willing to give. Just being honest. But if you want to get back to this forgiveness aspect as being the prime element of grace, Christ on the cross saying, Abba, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, is the essence of the whole bit of grace. Because even in that most time when we're most guilty, the forgiveness comes through. That is, anytime, if anyone's ever experienced forgiveness from another or forgiveness from the Lord for something they've done, that's when they really feel grace the most. Particularly, as I said, blessed to be able to go to the sacrament of confession and hear the absolution every single time, that and know that the grace has been bestowed. That's such a gift. And even if you can get that not sacramentally but from a friend and hear the forgiveness, you feel lighter afterward. You wouldn't think that the spirit could be low and affect the step, but it does. It really does.
And I would say, like, one thing about grace, I think, is like it's not something that you have to necessarily have faith for, because, like, obviously in some parts of like Christianity, obviously you have to have, and he talks about it here in the book, like you have to have these certain faith for certain things to occur. But I think because grace, something that we can experience, like when you said about you feeling something lifted off of you, you don't necessarily have to believe in the idea or the metaphysics of grace to actually have it apply to you. Whereas maybe other parts of Christianity, in some way, you have to have a faith to believe that at the start, right? Like it's something that you could kind of experience, say, okay, well, I understand this, and it can apply to me.
You can see through the eyes of faith.
Yeah.
How about you, Sam? Any grace that you've particularly noticed and has come to be tangible to you?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about grace in a few different ways. And I mean, one is the sort of mercy or the blessings. And yeah, you think of it, and maybe not in confession if you're a Protestant, though. Though I do think it's important to, I mean, I mean, James says, "Confess your faults one to another," which, I mean that it does perhaps relate to the sacrament of confession, but I don't think that's only the sacrament of confession necessarily, and that I mean, I guess there should be an. I mean, we should come to other people, other believers, and yeah, with maybe you don't want to unload all your baggage on them, but also an openness and a humility and an honesty about, hey, this is where I'm struggling. And I mean, how well do I do that? I honestly don't know. But I guess as I was thinking about grace, though, so grace is in the passages we're reading, it's talked about a decent amount in the context of, gosh, I'm going to screw up a word here, but it's sortology.
Soteriology?
Soteriology, yes. Or in the context of salvation, which, I mean, that is part of what grace is about. But I guess, like, if you think of in, like, Reformed Christianity, there's the idea of salvific or specific grace and common grace. And I think of, like, the people I know who I'd say, like, oh, that person's life demonstrates grace. I mean, maybe it has something to do with the fact that they've changed or they've matured or you've seen mercy, but it's also about the fact that they carry a kind of holiness and a kind of selflessness that is, I mean, radically uncommon. And they're not necessarily people who are the most, I guess, learned, if you will, in my experience either. And I think of that, and I mean, I guess the people I know who I'd say, oh, like they really demonstrate or they really show grace. I mean, almost all of them probably have gone through something when you talk about the sort of like the cost of, I guess, grace or the cost of discipleship, if you will.
Yeah, the holiest people are never the ones you expect.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
one of the comments that kind of ran through my head when I was reading the bit about him going on about the young rich man. I never heard him said the young ruler. I guess I just didn't grow up in the right place. I'm like, what's he going on about? Oh yeah, the rich man. Was a comment that Father Gregory Pine made about the Franciscans when he was on talking to Father Mark Mary, and said the Franciscans exist to shame the church and to make everyone else uncomfortable, because they do what the rich man did, right? And it's funny because Bonhoeffer has the criticism of the monastery, right? That the monks are basically the super athletes and the rest of us are kind of just barely hoping to get by. I feel that myself frequently. Like, I can barely hope for purgatory, which is still salvation. Let's be clear. Still saved. But that is a constant rebuke, right? And what do we do about that? Sometimes I'm not sure. It's how do I go into obedience the way that he talks about and the way that God is asking me? Because we're not all called to the same obedience.
Yeah.
Which may be part of the story that we're getting at and what Bonhoeffer is trying to point to. But that's the next thing probably I'd like to talk about, is that bit about obedience.
Yeah. I did find that part very compelling. I was thinking about it. It's almost like is there a way in which if you even begin to negotiate it, you're kind of on the wrong path? Because I put the title on here and I was being a little bit cheeky, but it's like if you even have to ask a question, I don't know. It's like kind of, you talk about children going to their parents, and it's like if you kind of know most of the time what they're gonna say, right? And sometimes Bonhoeffer. Well, I don't know if this is actually necessarily in the scripture. I think he took a pretty dim view in some ways of the rich young ruler, but there's a way in which he is playing a game though with Jesus, right? It's like, okay, what do I need to do? And he's expecting Jesus to give him some answer that might have to do with Leviticus or law or something like that. But that's not the game Jesus is playing at that time, right?
No, I think you're completely right. And a lot of us treat it that way, whether we want to or not. And it gets back to kind of something that Benedict said. I don't know. I think it might have been an introduction as a comment that the Son divides, right? The Father brings together. And what the Son asks of us is almost always going to cost us. And we're not usually prepared for that ask. And that's one of the things that kind of ran through my mind during him going over that exchange, is in the back of my mind. The Son divides. The Son divides. And he divides us from the world that we live in for our own benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I know, and I've highlighted on page 64, in the Gospels, the very first step a man must take is an act which radically affects his whole existence. And then he gives his critique about the Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church demanded this step as an extraordinary possibility which only monks could achieve, while the rest of the faithful must content themselves with an unconditional submission to the Church and its ordinances. The Lutheran confessions also significantly recognize the first step. So I think, I don't know how I feel. It's an interesting critique. I don't necessarily disagree with his point. I do think that, I don't know, because it's just because obviously his critique comes down to what do the monks do so much differently in terms of belief than somebody else? Yes, they give up their worldly possessions, but someone who gives up their possessions doesn't give up their possessions, but they can still have that same dedication in their attitude, mind, heart, soul, whatever, in how they live out to God. Does that make them any less than the monk? I guess that's kind of where he's coming from. I think in today's culture, maybe there's less of a focus on the monastery, the monk, these type of sort of vocations. Maybe more recently, you might see more, a little more highlight on it. But I think generally in culture, we tend to look at it as more of an oddity than anything. So in a world where even just not being on your phone every day, all the time, might be considered an act of like faith or whatever, a big leap of faith at that point, right? So I don't know. I kind of go back and forth. I see where he's coming from. I don't disagree, but I also do think there is nothing wrong with being a monk or these type of vocations. I do think there is something to be appreciated about it. I'm really kind of back and forth here, so I don't know how to feel.
Yeah.
One or the other.
I mean, I think the temptation to view the spiritual as the other in some way is always there, right? I mean, to say like, oh, that's not for me. I mean, I think there's different ways at which that temptation comes up. I mean, you see it with the rich young ruler, right? Because Christ says one of the things that struck me is, well, sell all you have, give it to the poor, and follow me. And I mean, we hear the first part of that as being like the difficult part, which maybe it is, but I mean, maybe in some ways the second part actually is more difficult. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Bonhoeffer talks about Peter's martyrdom, and as far as I know, no one ever got killed for giving away their possessions, right? I mean, so, and I mean, not just the physical toll of that, but maybe the embarrassment, if you will, and the humiliation of that too.
I don't know, maybe it's worth considering and kind of just playing on what you said, giving away all your possessions never killed you, but following Christ will. In a way, following Christ is giving away the last possession you have, which is yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Now you've lost everything to gain everything, right? As the gospel says. That is one of the thoughts that kind of percolated in my mind when you're talking about it. The other, when we were going back, also repudiate all this Lutheran nonsense at some point. But what I did want to highlight and was going through my mind when we were talking about it and reading the book was infusing your life with holiness and effort the whole way through. It kind of reminded me of a lot of the ways that you'll see a lot of people in Japan try to keep their job, right? They try to make it mastery, and that you can try to do that in your own life with your own spiritual pursuits through everything. And if you want to use the Jesuits, right? Ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. Everything is for the greater glory of God. And everything you do in a day. And I've definitely tried this every now and then, making every movement and motion something to glorify God. And to do that, doing it to the best of my ability. It can be tiring, utterly tiring. Can't do it all the time. I can't do it all the time. Maybe somebody can. Maybe that's where the monks are better than me. But that part definitely feels like you're not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's exhausting because you're trying so hard to make everything perfect, not just for other people, but for him, ultimately.
Yeah, you talk about obedience, and I mean, I definitely think about the disciples and their calling, and it is something where we don't really know very much about them. They're not really characters, certainly before they encounter Jesus. And I mean, maybe there's more to it than we realize in the story, but it doesn't seem like they're necessarily picked because they were exceptional leaders or exceptionally wise people, but they were people who were open to God. And yeah, I just think about that, and it is, I mean, something. I mean, in some ways, you could almost say, well, I definitely had this thought in my mind, the fact that the rich young ruler, that he knew the scriptures, it was that in some ways a hindrance to him? Which, I mean, not that knowing scriptures are bad, but was he already in a mindset where he was, if you will, haggling with God? Whereas maybe sometimes you can be more open if you're, I don't know, less focused on those kinds of things in some way.
No, I think you bring up a good point, right? Like he talks about it right near the kind of like the last few pages of our set of readings today, quoting from Timothy and Second Timothy, is it?
Yeah.
That the search for truth is laudable, and I certainly believe that. But sometimes, are you using it to obscure? Or are you using it to reduce your culpability, not out of a sense of justice, but out of a sense of fear, right? A fear of God, in that I don't want the things that I want taken away from me to follow you. I want to have both. I want to do the things I want to do. I want to be guiltless for it, and I want to be righteous at the same time. Where the simple believer often has, PBK I think has brought this up, and it's very true, a greater ability to follow, because he simply says, well, I'm going to take, that all seems like I can't do that, so I'm just not going to do it, right? I'm not even going to ask. I'm not even going to go into it. I'm just going to take the blanket assumption. And that's often the better path to fear God than to seek out an exculpatory answer. Because you're seeking to obscure, you're not seeking to clarify, even though you're using your abilities and your reason to come to perhaps a true answer, but for the wrong reason.
And I think maybe part of his critique also could come from the idea that, yes, you can give up all your possessions, but you can also do it in a selfish way, if that makes sense. Like, you might say, well, I'm going to do this, but it's more vainglory. Like in the Gospels, where you had the two men praying, and the one was being very boastful about it and stuff. So he's doing something that is good, right? It'd be considered prayer to be good, but he's doing it in a way that is meant to bring attention to himself as opposed to bringing attention to God. And so I think that probably wasn't something that maybe was on Bonhoeffer's minds or people's minds back then, because people really weren't giving away things just to be seen as like holy per se. Like people were generally much poorer than we are today, right? But I think of like a Mr. Beast, for example, to bring in like pop culture today, where like you're giving away all these things and stuff, and I guess it does make him appear more, I guess, like a holy person in like a secular context. But does it actually bring him or his audience closer to God? No, right? So in some ways, I think maybe that going like a full aesthetic, or maybe say I was like, oh, I'm depressed, I just want to go be a hermit, or I want to be a monk, whatever. Am I doing that for the right reason? Am I doing that just because I'm tired of everyone around me and I just want to like leave this world? So I guess that part has been in the Bible, right? Like you might see that in like the Exodus story, like kind of like Moses hitting the rock, where the second time, like when he wasn't supposed to, and he was very frustrated. He said, well, it worked for before. I'm sick of these people, right? I'm just going to do it and get it over with. I can't take all the yapping, which I understand. I hate yapping, but that wasn't what he was supposed to do, right? So sometimes we might do something that is considered a good, or something that might be ordered properly, but we're doing it in a disordered manner, I would say.
Yeah.
The sneaky way about giving away property, what immediately comes to mind is the problems the Franciscans had, where no one was allowed to own anything, but the monastery owned everything. So the corporate person became richer and richer and richer and richer, while every individual member ostensibly owned nothing, right? It's a constant issue. Like, well, what do I do now? I mean, it's one of the reasons they have some Franciscans do, I think it's called a poverty check, to constantly throw things away that they've accumulated. Yeah, to be like, do poor people really need this sort of deal? But you're totally right. You can get around it even ostensibly owning nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a sin of Ananias and Sapphira, right? I mean, as far as I know, I'd have to read the story, but I mean, there was never any command for them to give everything they had away, right? I mean, but they wanted to use their generosity as a sort of tool, right, to look good and as a way to I mean, they confuse their generosity with pride. Uh, uh,
I mean, people used to be wary of people giving gifts freely, right? Like,
Mm.
okay, now I'm in your debt. Do
Right.
I accept this gift or not? Like, it's not freely given, even though it is.
Right. Which I guess is a good contrast to grace, because grace is something that is freely given, right? So, and it's not something we're not in God's debt because He gives us grace, because He gives it freely. So,
Yep, freely given, unmerited, and there's nothing you can do to get it, even if you want it, right?
Yeah.
It's that mystery.
Yeah. I mean, the question of I guess, how does it relate to people who are living in North America in the 21st century is a very big one, because I think I've even compared to, like, for example, Joseph Ratzinger, in a biography of his that I had read, there was a passage where his mother and father uh, were literally like, well, there's a literal marriage market. People talk about like Tinder or Bumble or whatever dating app is popular now as being a marriage market, but it involved like haggling about furniture, and it sort of implied that Joseph Ratzinger's father had actually kind of overstated the amount of furniture he had. Like he said, like, I've got a dresser and a table, but he had actually only had a dresser. And it's like there was some like real back and forth about this, like, what possessions will you bring to the marriage? So I think of that, and I think of like, man, how, I don't know, even like the poorest person I know probably has at least like 15 pieces of furniture, I would guess. Like, even if they don't own their own house, or even if they have to like live with someone else, they probably still at least have like some of those basic possessions and things that we think of as being just like, oh yeah, that's what everyone has, but that's not always true. And like, I mean, and I don't think, I don't know, I know like the um, Platt stuff, like on some level that struck me as kind of a little bit silly, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, could I definitely be less attached to my possessions? I mean, I think the answer is unequivocally yes.
Well, if you want to just dive a little bit behind the text and into Bonhoeffer in his context, right? A lot of this is probably aimed at Germany, right? It's aimed at the people, the vast majority of people who did not vote for the Nazis to come into power, or did not actually really approve of anything. But, you know, if I talk, well, then there's going to be problems. And it might not even be my life. It might just be, I'm not going to get that promotion. I'm not going to be able to afford this Volkswagen next year, right? All these little things that I'd have to give up, short of the ultimate, full measure of devotion. It's that little bit of bourgeoisie safety that I'm not willing to give up. And I think about that all the time, right? Just in my work, I've definitely had things where I'm not comfortable doing something I've been ordered to do. It's not crossed a line yet, and I don't know if it ever will. But during COVID, it came close. It came close a few times. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what is the prudent thing to do? And is prudence really the answer that I should be looking to? That kind of haunts me when I think about the subcontext or subtext behind a lot of the discussion of the bourgeoisie and not being able to give that costly grace what it deserves, as opposed to accepting the cheap grace.
Yeah. Have you watched Luke's favorite movie, A Hidden Life?
No, I have not, but it's definitely been on my list.
Yeah. So, I mean, the main character of it, he's this guy he's a skills tradesman, and he's past the age where he would have even been enlisted in the military, and he's living in this town that's in Bavaria, and it's actually shot with, well, it's a Terrence Malick film with a wide scope lens, so you have this real sense of like being on top of a mountain, like kind of in the middle of nowhere when you're watching it. And I mean, basically, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to pledge my allegiance to the Nazis. And I mean, from what you can tell, like basically, there's not really that much practical effect that would have happened to him if he had, but it was still like the whole thing of, no, I mean, this is my conscience, and this is where I feel like God has placed me. And I think even at one point, there's a priest that's even like, oh, well, maybe you should just sign this. It's not like that big of a deal, really. But at the same time, I mean, there's something to be said about that witness, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, faith requires obedience, but obedience requires faith too, right? So, yeah.
How do you practice obedience?
How do I practice obedience?
How do you cultivate that virtue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, well, I guess yeah. I mean, I guess in giving, I guess that's one thing. I mean, you talk about possessions, and maybe I haven't done as good a job with that, but it's I guess, just like the faith of knowing, okay, even if, I mean, yeah, that God will provide for me, right? I mean, that's one. Yeah, honestly, I mean, one of the things that's, gosh, been maybe kind of hard for me is sometimes just going to church, and I mean, I don't know, saying actually, the church I've been going to most recently doesn't recite the creed, but saying the creed, singing the songs. I mean, yeah. If it were up to me, they would.
Pastor Sam, incoming.
Yeah. Oh gosh, am I being recruited to be the Midwest evangelical? Oh God.
How about you, Zeke? How do you cultivate obedience?
I think it's tough because, like, in order to be obedient to something, you have to believe in something, right? So I think
Zeke doesn't believe in anything. Confirmed. Belief is mid.
It's like I'm working remotely, doing whatever I want.
It's great. What can I say? I am the non-denominational here, so I should say something like that, right?
He basically has Cheetos on his fingers.
No, I think, well, the problem is that we have an idea that so example, if you're obedient to your parents, right? Your parents have to have some sort of, if your parents let you do whatever, can you be truly obedient to them by just doing whatever you want? Not really, right? Because you're just doing whatever you choose to do, and they're just allowing that, right? But if your parents say, okay, these are the rules, and these are you follow them, right? Then you have to be obedient to that, right? And that's something that's it's honestly very subconscious, more than honestly conscious, because you can consciously choose to be obedient to your parents, but then somebody says, well, why don't you do this? That contradicts with that, right? It comes to peer pressure. And then what wins out in the little war in the gray? Is it going to be your voice saying,
I like that.
You know, is somebody going to say, well, you know, I want to have fun. They're not going to find it anyways. What does it matter? Because your parents can't see you potentially doing whatever it is you're doing, right? Or does other voice say, well, no, I think your parents would actually want you to do that, right? So I think, I don't know if you can necessarily cultivate it yourself, but you have to have a strong belief in whatever it is that we're referring to, whether it's in Christianity, Christ, you're obedient to him, right? You have to have a strong faith and foundation saying, well, these are the things that I want to be obedient to. And you are going to fail because you're a human, unless you're Jesus or, I don't know, Steve Jobs. I don't know pick whatever secular saint. I don't know where that came from, but pick whatever person you want to put out there.
I don't think Steve Jobs is a very compliant person.
Horrible. It's just, I don't know, that just came to my mind. But pick whatever you want to pick.
Mind searching, great person. Steve Jobs.
No, whether you're Bonhoeffer or whatever.
He looked at his phone and be like,
I have an Android phone, actually, so that one. I have no Apple devices in here. I hate Apple, ironically, but I don't know where that came from. But regardless, whoever it is, St. Paisios, Thomas Aquinas, Bonhoeffer, take your pick. I'll give you a smorgasbord to choose from, right? They couldn't necessarily, I would say, cultivate something, but they had to cultivate their belief. And their belief in what they believed in would then inform their obedience. Even if they would fail, they would use that as fuel to work towards better obedience in the future. That'd be my answer.
I want to give a few things, but one outside of myself is that I think PVK's basically sticking with the CRC is a great example of patriotic obedience. Sticking it out and saying basically, I'm going to obey whatever Synod says. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to do that. That's a great example to me of exercising obedience as a virtue. For myself, during COVID, it was very difficult to wear a mask every freaking time I had to go to mass, but the bishop asked me to do it, so I did it, right? And there were people who didn't, and they didn't get disciplined. There was nothing going on, but most of us just sucked it up and did it. And the moment that the order stopped, we all took it off, right? We did that. That was, to me, an extremely difficult thing to do. And that was a bit of costly obedience to me personally. It felt very upsetting. I hate, it felt like I'm suffocating. I never liked them. That to me was one of my, at least personally, proud moments of obedience. Doing what I was told when I didn't believe it. B, I didn't think it worked. And C, I hated it.
You're right.
All of it above. Just didn't want to do it. But I did it. I sat there and I did as my bishop asked. That to me felt like it helped. I know obeying some of the Lenten precepts is difficult for me because I'm a fat Westerner. And I want to drink the coffee that I said I'd give up. I actually had visions of coffee the other day. It was very bizarre. I imagined myself going to Tim Hortons and getting a coffee. But I had to say no to meat. Someone offered me chili. Mama's chili. I couldn't eat it. So those types of things I think are very good for cultivating obedience. You're just doing, you're obeying without question.
Yeah. I think fasting, whether it's a complete fast or whether it's foregoing something like caffeine or red meat, I think that definitely is a time where it's funny because I don't really have a scheduled lunch hour, so I can't tell you how many days I'll just work till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll be like, oh, dang, I haven't had anything to eat today, basically. Maybe I've had some
I don't get people like you. I don't get it.
Well, but if I decide, okay, I'm going to fast today, then every piece of food I see, it's just like a magnet to my eye. And it suddenly becomes front of mind. And it's, where part of that is that the obedience brings out things in your character that you're not seeing there before. You begin to realize, okay, man, I'm really dependent on this. And you don't realize it until you step away from whatever it is for a moment.
And you know what? I think it's actually, we didn't touch on this, but Sam, are you a partner in your firm?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, so you're basically your own boss, where me and Zeke, we work for people, right? One of his goals is to never work for anybody ever again. But in that way, we still cultivate obedience, right? I have had many instances where I basically had to, quote Tennyson, mine is not to question why, but just to do and to die. You want to do something stupid? Sure. I'll obey. But that sort of thing, I think is actually good for your soul in a way of, I'll just do it. Just like Bonhoeffer says, no question, just do. Just do.
Yeah, no,
Get to church.
Yeah, oh yeah, he did have that spiel in there, but no, I mean honestly, when it comes to dealing with my customers, it's kind of like a joke. Like I had a friend who like his father would be on the line with telemarketers in the '90s, and his line was always, "Oh, well, you give me $50 and I will." That's kind of how I feel sometimes, and that I have to basically have other people on some level decide what is valuable for my time. Like, I guess there's a part of me that I see people who work in large organizations who can just concentrate fully on one project. But yeah, you talk about surrender though, and there's a kind of, I don't know, hopefully I learned something in that process about, yeah, sacrifice and obedience and service to other people. I don't know if I do, but hopefully I do.
I think there is. I mean, I'm sure you've definitely been obedient to a client that you knew you needed to retain, but man, you hate that guy. Hope maybe not. Maybe you only have good clients. But you know, it happens, right? I mean, I've got a friend who owns a firm, and I've never talked to him about it, but I'm sure there's clients where he's like, I can't stand that guy. But if I let him go, then my firm dies. So I have to just suck it up. And in that way, we all obey somebody, even if there's no like hierarchical relationship between the two of us. Yeah, it's just something to consider, right? Like cultivating that virtue of obedience. And I think Bonhoeffer is definitely on the right track there. And it's something I'm curious how Protestants can do better often, because you get accused of just hopping ship, right? Hopping ship. Don't like the new guy, I'm out. Which is definitely a caricature for sure. Like we're talking about PVK. He's my first example. He's not hopping ship. He's going down with the Dutch shoes, right? Going down to the bottom of the bog. That sort of loyalty, I think, is good in terms of cultivating your obedience.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of faith too that, I mean, ultimately God's put you in the right place, right? Because I mean, yeah, I mean, we're all very consumer driven. Like even people who, if you're part of a more liturgical tradition, I mean, how oftentimes like I know, Mark, I know I've heard you complain about like sometimes there's, I guess, guitars in your mass. So
the bongos is what gets me.
The bongos, yes. Bongos. But I mean, part of like being part of any family on some level is surrendering control, right? And sometimes what the other people in the family want takes precedence, and yeah, but I don't think we're very good at that in general. I mean, I'll speak for myself.
Yeah, and then there's the question of obedience to who, and when does the obedience one trump the other? I mean, I've had a super hard time transferring parishes basically because I had so many responsibilities at the one that I started at that's much farther away from where I live now compared to the one I can walk to. And honestly, the only thing that's really tipped the scales is they have a children's program that my son actually can stand and looks forward to going in instead of me fighting and screaming with him at the other parish. So I have to prioritize him. I have to prioritize his formation over all other obediences. So basically I'm submitting that way, even if I don't really want to move. Things like that come up. And yeah, people do church shop. Like people liturgically shop, parish shop. Like there's no way around that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, children's programs is a big thing that people church shop over. So, yeah.
Hugely important.
Which, yeah, I have some sympathy for that. I mean, not just that you want a place where your kids want to be, but I mean, you want to be somewhere where, like, you feel like things are taken care of and they're, doing the right, like, background checks on people and making sure everything's in line and all that. So, not just like putting out whoever happens to be there that week.
Hey, you.
To watch kids.
You're doing it.
I've been in country churches like that. Not any that I attended, but visited like with family. Yeah.
Okay, we're coming up on the hour. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on, Sam?
No, I think we had a pretty good discussion. We didn't rehash any of the Reformation, thankfully.
Yeah, let me touch on that. Why is there so much anti-Catholicism in this book? Is this normal for what you guys do?
I honestly did not really remember basically any of that part of it, even though I've read it before. So I was thinking about it too. So, but yeah,
It wasn't that bad.
Well, I read Catholic books all the time. Protestant might as well just not exist, right? It's never mentioned. You might get a passing mention in like St. Louis de Montfort as the rebels, but besides that, no, it just doesn't exist. But here I'm like reading every 10 pages. Got to be something about Romanism. Got to be something about like what the hell are you going on about?
I remember there was like that whole thing in Ratzinger about the Lutheran theory of the body, and like both all three of us were just like, what is Ratzinger talking about? Like we're just completely clueless. I remember even asking him. I'm like, "Oh, you're the smart one." He's just like, "Oh, I have no idea."
Yeah, it's just so absent most of the time in all Catholic stuff I read.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe it's just is this normal? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I do know that Bonhoeffer was originally a big part of the ecumenical movement in Germany, and then he had pulled out because he had felt that they were very much not, like you had alluded to earlier, Mark, people in the Germans in general were very apathetic towards the Nazis, and the ecumenicals in some ways, I wouldn't say embraced, but they were like, kind of like, hey, he's not that bad, and co-endorsed it without, and so that's why he had pulled out the ecumenical movement. So I assume he was just salty at that point, because I know he doesn't really have any ire for anybody else in the Protestant, mostly just Catholics, but because obviously he does have some beef with some issues that they had there, but
can you at least get our theology right, though?
I think there was a line where, what is it? Cheap grace was worse than Charlemagne. That wasn't there.
Yeah, I did see that. That was weird.
Is this some German hang-up I'm not getting?
Oh, gosh, yeah. No.
Cheap grace is worse than Charlemagne.
That was almost a line, word for word.
I think it is. I think it's pretty close to word for word, actually.
Oh, gosh.
I do remember reading it, stepping back, like, what is he talking about?
But, yeah. No, it's funny. Yeah, it definitely was, like, kind of more on my mind than it was when it might have been on my mind a little bit at the time, but it was probably close to, between 15 to 20 years ago that I had read it before. So,
things changed in your life, I bet.
Yeah, yep. So, yeah, I didn't read it with people on a live stream. I'd read, Catholic apologetics with. So,
Zeke can choose the next book. It'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. I'd be up for that. So, all right. Thanks for getting on tonight. It was fun as usual. So, and till next time.